At 6:47 on the morning of December 1st, 1939, Corporal Simo Haihu crouched in a snow drift to 180 meters from a Soviet machine gun nest, watching three enemy soldiers through iron sights his commanding officer had told him to abandon. 34 years old, 5'3" tall, weighing barely 160 pounds, the smallest sniper in recorded history. The Soviet forces had invaded Finland just 24 hours earlier, and in the first day of fighting alone, they had already killed 47 Finnish soldiers in his sector. Some military estimates put Soviet losses at over 200. But the mathematics didn't matter when you were facing impossible odds. The Soviets had 90 soldiers for every one Finnish defender. They had scoped rifles manufactured in Soviet factories. They had professional spotters trained by the Red Army at specialized academies. They had tanks. They had artillery. They had numbers that made Finnish victories seem like a fantasy. Haihu had nothing but a Mosin-Nagant M28 rifle weighing 3.9 kilograms, iron sights that military command said were obsolete, and a willingness to do something that Soviet military doctrine said was completely suicidal. By the time the Winter War ended for months later, they would call him the White Death. Soviet soldiers would whisper his name like a curse. But on that first morning, huddled in the snow at -30 to see, he was just a small Finnish corporal that no one believed in. A man whose own military leadership had rejected him. A man whose own commanders thought was too old, too small, too unconventional to matter. Finland's military leadership had rejected Haihu when he first volunteered for combat duty. A man his age, 34, was considered old for frontline combat. A man that small, 5'3", was below even the minimum height requirements for most military branches. His hunting background meant nothing to officers trained in modern warfare. What Finland needed was professional soldiers trained in contemporary Soviet counter-tactics, not some village marksmen from the north with outdated equipment and unconventional ideas. The commanding officer wanted to assign him to supply lines. Haihu was too old, too small, too unorthodox. He belonged behind the lines, not on the front lines where real soldiers operated. He belonged counting ammunition, not fighting. But Haihu had been shooting since childhood in northern Finland, in the forests near the Russian border, where hunting was the only way to survive winter. He knew the terrain better than any officer knew maps. He understood wind and distance, and the mathematics of killing at range. He had won regional shooting competitions before the war. He understood something that military academies didn't teach, that warfare, at its core, was mathematics. Distance, wind, target movement, temperature, effects on ammunition, air density at different altitudes. It was all equations waiting to be solved. Most soldiers fought with emotion. Haihu fought with calculations. On the second day of the war, Haihu walked into the colonel's tent. Around him, Finnish officers were studying maps spread across tables, trying to figure out how to hold territory against Soviet forces that outnumbered them 90-1. Artillery was thundering in the distance. Medics were carrying wounded soldiers past the command post. The atmosphere was one of controlled panic. Finland was being invaded by the Soviet Union, and nobody knew how long they could last. Haihu made a simple request. Let me hunt for 1 week. Assign me to a forward sector with confirmed Soviet sniper activity. If I fail, if I don't achieve results, send me to supplies, and you'll never hear from me again. If I succeed, if I prove that an unconventional approach works better than doctrine, send me to the front lines and let me operate with minimal restrictions. The colonel, desperate for anything that might work against the Soviet onslaught, agreed. He had nothing to lose. One old marksman couldn't make things worse. The war was already going badly. At least this man had volunteered for the most dangerous work. At least someone was willing to try something different. Hai-Hu spent the next 3 days preparing his equipment and studying his sector. He gathered white fabric sheets, cloth, anything white, and covered his rifle completely. The gun had to be invisible against snow. He fashioned a white camouflage suit from cloth and natural materials, covering everything except his eyes. He studied the terrain with obsessive precision, walking the forward positions, talking to Finnish soldiers about where they'd seen Soviet activity, understanding traffic patterns and sight lines. He understood that Soviet snipers operated with specific tactical patterns. They liked elevated positions. The psychology of height gave them confidence. They relied on their scope's magnification, made them dependent on optical equipment. They followed Soviet military doctrine like it was scripture handed down from the Kremlin itself. Every tactic had been approved. Every movement had been planned. Hai-Hu intended to violate every principle they believed in. He intended to make their training and experience into liabilities. If you want to see how Hai-Hu's iron sights outshot Soviet snipers with optical equipment in -40 cold, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Hai-Hu. The innovation Hai-Hu developed was so unconventional that even Finnish command would struggle to believe it worked until they saw the results with their own eyes and verified them with military intelligence. No scope. While every other trained sniper in the world was mounting optical equipment by 1939, Hai-Hu refused. Why? He understood something others didn't. Ice and extreme cold ruined scope lenses. Frost buildup made optics useless at the worst possible moment. When temperature drops to -40 C. When humidity freezes instantly at night and morning. When condensation becomes ice crystals inside sealed glass. Optical equipment becomes a liability rather than an advantage. The Soviet snipers with their scopes mounted on Mosin nagants would find their magnified view fogging over, icing over, becoming useless exactly when they needed to see clearly. Their advantage would become their weakness. Hai-Hu's iron sights would function perfectly in any temperature. Instead of elevated positions in trees or on ridges, the classic sniper doctrine, Hai-Hu positioned himself at snow level, buried in drifts like a sleeping animal. Traditional doctrine taught that elevation provided advantage. Hai-Hu knew that at snow level, he was invisible. His entire rifle was wrapped in white cloth so the metal wouldn't reflect light. His uniform was white. His face was covered. He looked like a snow drift. He was a snow drift. Visibility in winter Finland is different than summer warfare. The landscape is monochromatic white. Anything that breaks the white pattern becomes visible. Hai-Hu didn't break the pattern. He became part of it. When he fired, he aimed downward into the snow to hide muzzle flash. The downward angle hid the visual signature of his shot. Most snipers fired horizontally. The muzzle flash was visible for kilometers on clear days. Hai-Hu fired into snow. The flash was absorbed. The sound was dampened. By the time Soviet soldiers could react, could process what they heard, could communicate the threat up their chain of command, Hai-Hu was already relocating. The third principle: never stay in one position longer than 3 shots. After 3 kills from a location, Hai-Hu moved. After his 3rd shot, he was gone. Move, shoot, move again. Never establish a pattern. Never let them calculate where you will be next. This violated Soviet doctrine completely. Soviet field manuals taught that a good sniper held territory, maintained position, dominated an area for extended periods. The doctrine made sense in some contexts. If you were defending a fixed position, staying put made tactical sense. Hai-Hu treated each position as expendable. He used each location once, maybe twice if conditions were perfect. Then he abandoned it forever. Soviet counter-snipers couldn't predict his movements because there were no movements to predict. He didn't follow patterns. He didn't establish routine. He didn't have a normal way of operating. This meant Soviet command couldn't set ambushes for positions he'd already left. They couldn't predict where he'd operate next because there was no logical progression to predict. By December 15th, only 2 weeks after the war started, Haihu had 43 confirmed kills. Soviet command finally took notice. This wasn't random sniper activity. This wasn't a few lucky shots by some farmer with a hunting rifle. This was systematic elimination. This was a trained professional operating at a level Soviet intelligence hadn't anticipated. They sent counter-sniper teams, professional units trained specifically for this mission, specially trained, equipped with optics and spotters. They came to finish lines expecting to find a conventional sniper using conventional tactics. They found nothing. The Finnish sniper seemed to operate according to no doctrine they knew. He appeared without warning. He fired from impossible positions. He vanished before they could triangulate his location. 3 counter-sniper teams were sent to find him in the first 2 weeks. All 3 teams had casualties. None of them found him. Soviet soldiers started refusing to move during daylight. Fear became a tactical factor. Officers couldn't order men forward when everyone believed an invisible enemy was watching. The psychological effect of Haihu's presence on the battlefield was almost as important as his actual kills. In military terms, psychological dominance is worth multiple battalions. If soldiers believe they can't win, they've already lost. If soldiers believe death is invisible and watching, they become paralyzed. Soviet command was facing this psychological paralysis. Their soldiers were becoming less effective not because of tactical defeats, but because of fear. Soviet military command became obsessed with stopping him. They needed to kill the White Death or prove to their soldiers that he could be killed. Commanders offered rewards. First 100 rubles for whoever killed the White Death, then 500 rubles when the kills reached 100, then 1,000 rubles when the count climbed higher. Bounties increased as his kill count rose. Soviet propaganda broadcasts mentioned him by name. They called him a myth, said no single person could achieve his kill count. Obviously, this must be multiple snipers. Or propaganda said he was a Finnish fiction designed to boost morale. But the fear among Soviet soldiers was real. Soviet soldiers whispered about him. Officers worried about him. Command planned operations around the terror he inspired. This was unprecedented in World War II. One sniper, operating alone, had become so significant that Soviet military planning had to account for him. At 9:22 on the morning of December 23, 1939, Haihu positioned himself in a snowdrift near a frozen creek in the Suomussalmi sector. The intelligence was specific. A Soviet sniper had been operating in this area for 3 days. He had killed 5 Finnish soldiers. He was professional. He was dangerous. He had a confirmed POO scope. His positioning was tactically sound. Distance to potential target, 240 meters. Temperature outside, -38°C. Wind, slight from the west, maybe 2 to 3 kilometers per hour. Haihu adjusted his mental calculations. At -38°C, rifle ammunition behaves differently than it does at room temperature. The powder charge burns slightly hotter. The bullet travels marginally faster. The expansion of gases is different. All these factors had to be accounted for in his firing solution. He had calibrated his rifle for these exact conditions during practice sessions. He understood the mathematics. He waited. Patience was the primary skill of sniper work. Not marksmanship, not courage, Not tactical knowledge, patience, the ability to remain motionless for hours, to let time pass without moving, without scratching an itch, without allowing discomfort to dictate movement, to control your body like it's a machine, to wait for the right moment rather than rush a bad shot. Haihu could remain in a single position for 8 hours without moving. His breathing was controlled to the point where an observer could barely see his chest rising and falling. His heart rate was steady despite the cold. His mind was focused only on the mathematics of the shot. The waiting began at 10:47. Nothing. At 11:03, he saw movement. A Soviet soldier 180 meters away, crouching behind a fallen log. The man had a rifle. He appeared to be scanning the finish lines. Haihu began to raise his rifle. Then he stopped. Something was wrong about this entire situation. The position was too exposed, too obvious. A professional Soviet sniper wouldn't position his shooter in a location that was clearly visible from Finnish territory unless he wanted it to be seen. Unless this was bait. Unless the real shooter was somewhere else, watching for movement. Watching for someone to take the shot at the obvious target. Haihu scanned the ridge line to the north. His eyes searched slowly, methodically, controlled. He glanced every rock, every snow drift, every possible position where a sniper could hide. His patience paid off. There, 240 meters away, barely visible against the white landscape, a second Soviet soldier, partially concealed behind rocks. This one wasn't moving. This one was watching. This one had the scope. This one was the real threat. The first soldier was bait. This second soldier was the hunter. Haihu had recognized the trap. Haihu made his decision. He would use the bait against them. He would turn their own tactics into their weakness. First, he aimed at the exposed sniper behind the fallen log. He adjusted for the -38 temperature. Bullets behaved differently in extreme cold, traveling slightly faster, dropping slightly less over distance. He adjusted for the 2 to 3 km/h wind from the west. Minor adjustment, but critical at this distance of 180 meters. He controlled his breathing. 3 deep breaths, then hold. His finger found the trigger. The trigger on his Mosin Nagant was smooth, refined through countless practice sessions. Haihu had spent hours adjusting it at the Finnish military range before deployment. The trigger pull was exactly 1.5 kilograms of pressure, optimal for precision work. He squeezed. The Mosin Nagant kicked against his shoulder. The sound cracked across the frozen valley like splitting wood. 180 meters away, the Soviet sniper jerked backward. His body convulsed. He fell into the snow. Haihu worked the bolt instantly. His hands moved with mechanical precision, trained through hundreds of practice drills. The empty cartridge ejected, brass falling in a slight arc. Smoke drifted from the rifle. He chambered another round, but he didn't aim at the first position again. Instead, he swung his rifle toward the ridge where the real threat was. He saw movement. The Soviet sniper was trying to reposition, to face the sound of the shot. His cover was compromised. He was turning. His head was moving. The movement created a target, a silhouette, a shape against white. Haihu put the crosshairs on the dark shape. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second-guess his firing solution. He squeezed the trigger. The Mosin Nagant kicked again. The Soviet sniper fell backward into the snow. His rifle tumbled after him. 2 shots. 2 kills. But Haihu didn't remain to confirm. Soviet infantry would be responding. They would be investigating the sound. They would be organizing search patterns. He grabbed his rifle and the ammunition pouch and moved 30 meters north, created a new firing position in fresh snow, lay prone in the drifts, waited. 5 minutes later, Soviet infantry appeared. At least 6 soldiers, maybe more. They had heard the shots. They were searching the area. Hai-Hu remained invisible. The snow held him. His white camouflage was absolute. They passed within 50 meters and never saw him. They passed directly over his position and didn't recognize that a man was lying beneath them. They found the bodies. They radioed back to command. They organized a larger search pattern. But Hai-Hu was already gone, relocating to a position they would never think to check. By the time Soviet commanders understood that one sniper had killed 2 of their soldiers, Hai-Hu was 500 meters away, establishing a new position, waiting for the next opportunity. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who care about these forgotten soldiers. By January 10, 1940, Hai-Hu had 127 confirmed kills, 127 Soviet soldiers dead. Soviet command was becoming desperate. The finish lines weren't just holding territory against impossible odds. They were becoming more dangerous as one man systematically hunted Soviet soldiers. With impossible efficiency, they sent entire hunting teams, professional counter-sniper units, elite soldiers trained specifically for this mission. Hai-Hu killed 14 of them. 14 trained professionals sent specifically to find and eliminate him. All of them dead. The fear became psychological. Soviet soldiers started refusing to advance. Officers couldn't order them forward because everyone knew the White Death was watching from somewhere. Fear became a psychological weapon more effective than any tank or artillery piece. Weapons can destroy buildings. Fear destroys will. The psychological effect was documented in Soviet casualty reports. Soldiers refused to move during daylight. They dug in and stayed hidden. Unit commanders reported low morale. Men were talking about the Finnish ghost sniper. They were telling stories that grew more exaggerated with each retelling. Some said he was more than one man, that couldn't be possible for one sniper to have so many kills. Some said he couldn't be killed by conventional weapons. Some said he had supernatural abilities. Officers were worried about morale collapse. Soviet High Command sent investigators to determine if Hai-Hu was actually one person, or if Finnish propaganda was exaggerating to boost their own morale. The investigators went to the front lines. They talked to soldiers. They reviewed casualty reports. They examined the positions where kills had occurred. The reports came back. 1 sniper, 1 rifle, 127 confirmed kills. No exaggeration. This one man was systematically destroying Soviet offensive capability in his sector. Not through overwhelming numbers, but through pure terror. One man was changing the course of a military campaign. Then came January 15, 1940, the day Hai-Hu nearly died. The day that should have been the end of the White Death. He was repositioning between firing positions. He had just relocated from a location where he'd killed 2 Soviet machine gunners. Soviet artillery began. Shells landed around him. Explosions lit up the frozen landscape. Snow flew in all directions. The concussive force threw Hai-Hu backward even when shells exploded at distance. Then one detonated within 10 meters. The blast was catastrophic. Hai-Hu was thrown backward as if by an invisible giant. Blood ran down his face. His left eye wouldn't open. Shrapnel had torn through his cheek, through the left side of his face, deep into the tissue. He could taste blood. He was bleeding heavily. His left jaw was fractured. He tried to move and couldn't. A shell fragment had struck his jaw, and his left eye was swelling shut. He was conscious but immobilized. Pain was everywhere. He was dying in the snow. Finnish medics found him. They thought he was dead at first. His left side of his face was unrecognizable. Blood had frozen on his cheek, but his eyes were open. He was still conscious. They carried him carefully to a field hospital behind the lines. The surgeons worked on him for hours. They cleaned the wound. They removed shrapnel from his face. They stitched the deep lacerations. They packed the injury with bandages. They told him he would survive, but the scarring would be permanent. The left side of his face would never look normal again. They told him he needed rest. At least 3 weeks. Possibly a month. No combat operations for weeks. The doctors were adamant. Complete rest or risk infection. Risk the wound reopening. Risk death from complications. Haihu refused. After 3 days, against doctors' orders, he walked out of the hospital. His left side was bandaged. He was weak. He was in pain with every movement. His left eye was still not fully recovered. But he was also still the White Death. Soviet command had placed a bounty on his head. Finnish soldiers needed him. The war was still happening. He couldn't afford to rest while Soviet soldiers were advancing. He returned to the lines on January 18th. His face was partially healed, but scarred permanently. One eye was still not fully recovered, and would never fully recover. He would have vision issues in that eye for the rest of his life. His body ached from the shrapnel wounds. Soviet intelligence heard he had been killed in the artillery barrage. They celebrated. They reported the death up the chain of command. Soviet soldiers got the news. The White Death was dead. They began to relax. For the first time in weeks, they started moving during daylight again. They started advancing. The fear was lifting. Then Haihu appeared. Same rifle, same tactics, same deadly precision. On January 19th, he killed 5 Soviet soldiers. On January 20th, 7 more. On January 21st, 9 more. Soviet demoralization became complete. The impossible had happened. The sniper they thought was dead had returned, scarred, weakened, but still operational. Fear returned with him. It was worse than before, because now the soldiers believed he was supernatural. He had been hit by artillery. He had been wounded. Yet he returned. How do you kill something that won't stay dead? The remaining weeks of January were devastating for Soviet forces. Haihu continued operations despite his injuries. He continued to add to his kill count. He continued to kill Soviet snipers, Soviet officers, Soviet soldiers. By February, the Soviet offensive had slowed dramatically in his sector. Soviet forces were making progress elsewhere, but not here. Not where the White Death was operating. They were content to hold territory and advance at other points. This sector had become too costly. One man had changed military strategy for an entire invasion force. By the time the Winter War ended on March 13, 1940, Haihu had 505 confirmed kills. 505 Soviet soldiers dead by his rifle. That included 36 confirmed counter-snipers. Professional Soviet snipers, trained by the Red Army, equipped with modern optics, sent specifically to find and eliminate Haihu. All of them dead. All killed by a man who refused to use the technology they depended on. All killed by a man who violated every principle of military doctrine they understood. The number was staggering. The kill-to-mission ratio was unprecedented. No sniper in military history had achieved anything approaching this level of effectiveness. The Finnish military recognized him immediately. They decorated him. The Cross of Liberty, Finland's highest military honor. They asked him to train others. They wanted to understand how he had done it. How had one man changed the balance of a military campaign? How had one sniper altered Soviet strategy? Soviet forces had numerical advantage of 90-1 in some sectors. Soviet forces had superior equipment. Soviet forces had unlimited ammunition supplies. Yet one Finnish soldier had forced them to change tactics, change deployment patterns. changed their entire approach to warfare. Finnish command wanted to replicate his success. But Hai's real legacy would be longer than the Winter War itself. His tactics became official doctrine. Finnish military sniper schools taught his methods: the no-scope approach, the snow-level positioning, the rapid repositioning, never stay in one location longer than 3 shots, the predictive fire calculations, the psychological warfare elements. By World War II's end, Soviet military academies were studying him. They analyzed his engagements. They tried to understand how he had been so effective. NATO forces incorporated his techniques into their training. Modern sniper schools worldwide still teach the principles of the White Death. The U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper School studies his case. British military instructors reference his tactics. Even today, in the 21st century, sniper training curricula include analysis of Simo Hai's methods from the Winter War. His tactics haven't become obsolete. They've become foundational. His rifle, the Mosin-Nagant M28, was preserved. It sits in the Finnish Military Museum today. No scope, no modifications, just iron sights and the legacy of 505 kills. The museum placard reads, Mosin-Nagant M28, 7.6 to x5 for MMR, used by Corporal Simo Hai. Winter War 1939-1940, 505 confirmed kills. Highest scoring sniper in recorded military history. Simo Hai survived the Winter War. He survived with permanent scarring from the artillery wound. He survived with one eye slightly damaged but still functional. He survived with shrapnel embedded in his face. He served again in the Continuation War when Finland fought alongside Germany against the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1944. He was wounded multiple times during this conflict. He was captured once and escaped. He survived 3 years of additional combat. He lived to age 96. He died in March 2002, having witnessed the entire evolution of sniper warfare from the Winter War through Korea, through Vietnam, through the Cold War. Watching technology advance exponentially while watching commanders finally understand what he had proven. Sometimes the simplest approach is the deadliest. Sometimes innovation isn't about technology, it's about thinking differently than your enemy expects. Hai never became famous during his lifetime the way other military heroes did. He gave few interviews. He didn't seek attention. He didn't write memoirs or give lectures. He lived a quiet life after the war. He worked as a farmer and a hunter. He raised a family. He lived modestly. But for those who studied military history, for those who studied sniper warfare, for those who understood how one individual can change the course of events, Simo Hai was legendary. In his later years, Hai rarely spoke about his kills. Journalists asked him how it felt to have killed 505 people. He said it was mathematics, distance, wind, target movement, temperature, effects on ammunition. It was all equations. He didn't speak with pride or regret. He spoke with the clinical detachment of a craftsman describing his work. He was a sniper. Snipers solved problems. His problem was Soviet soldiers advancing into Finnish territory. He had solved that problem. The numbers were simply the measurement of how effectively he had solved it. When asked if he ever thought about the men he had killed, he said he didn't think about them as men. He thought about them as targets. They were soldiers. They were advancing. They were a tactical problem. He had solved the problem. That was all. This wasn't cruelty. This was professionalism. This was the mindset necessary to operate at the level Hai operated. His legacy in military history is unique. He is studied not because he used innovative weapons or developed new tactics in the traditional sense. He is studied because he proved that individual excellence, individual discipline, individual willingness to think differently could overcome numerical disadvantage and technological disadvantage. In an age of mechanized warfare, armies, and industrial-scale killing, one man with a rifle proved that warfare was still, at its core, about skill and will, about understanding your enemy, about doing what they don't expect, about patience and precision, about refusing to accept conventional limitations. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from Finland, Russia, the United States, Canada, Sweden? Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Winter War or any conflict. Tell us what you think about high-he's tactics. Tell us if you think one person can really change the course of history. Just let us know you're here. We read every comment. Your perspective matters. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Simo Haihu doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Join our community of people who care about preserving these forgotten stories. Thank you.